sell back the ring. It was only a deposit on the ring. It was a layaway. How I sell back a layaway? You know, canceling a wedding, we're still pretty much paying on the rec hall and everything. All I did was make some calls going, something's going on. We're going to be delayed. This wedding's in 3 weeks. Even if Nikki came back that moment, she's been missing for days. I doubt the wedding's going to be planned, right on schedule. Something's going to be delayed.
She was just 3 weeks away from saying, "I do," when she vanished. And the man she planned to marry, he acted like he knew she wasn't coming back. The search for 28-year-old Nikki Macauan gripped this small Indiana town. Police combed neighborhoods, friends and family searched fields, and reporters crowded every press conference. But behind the scenes, suspicion was quietly shifting to the man who was supposed to be her future husband. From the moment Nikki stepped into that laundromat to the day police found her car miles away, every clue seemed to raise more questions than answers. A gift from a man she worked with hinted at an unhealthy obsession. And then, a stunning revelation: that same man had worn a badge. A police officer. Until the day he took his own life, with secrets still locked away. I'm Michael, and tonight, we investigate the disappearance of Nikki Macauan, a bride-to-be whose dream wedding turned into a mystery that still haunts Indiana to this day. Before the headlines, before the press conferences, there was just Nikki, 28 years old, vibrant, playful, always quick with a smile, living in the quiet community of Richmond, Indiana, and counting down the days to her wedding. Friends say she had been dreaming of it for years. And in just 3 weeks, it was finally happening. The man waiting at the altar? Bobby Webster, Nikki's high school sweetheart, the one she met in the hallways as a teenager and never quite forgot. They dated back then, broke up after graduation, and life took them in different directions. Bobby headed out of state. Nikki stayed here, building a life, starting a family. In her 20s, Nikki was in a relationship with a local man named Stephen Johnston. It was a love that brought her a daughter, Peyton, but it didn't last. Stephen later admitted he hadn't treated Nikki the way she deserved. He was unfaithful, controlling, abusive, and Nikki walked away, but her path would cross with Bobby's again. Years later, when Bobby returned to Richmond from California, they picked up right where they left off. Friends say it felt like something out of a movie, the first love, finding their way back to each other after all those years. Soon after, a proposal, a ring, and the promise of a fresh start. They were deep into wedding planning, tuxedo fittings, bridal showers, checklists. For flowers, catering, and music. Nikki talked about the dress she couldn't wait to wear, and about seeing Bobby's face when she walked down the aisle. But, like many stories in small towns, there were complications. Nikki's daughter meant her life still intersected with her ex, Stephen. They had to talk about school pickups, family schedules, and their child's future. And then, there was her job. Nikki worked at a correctional facility in nearby Dayton, Ohio. A place where friendships sometimes blurred into something more. One coworker in particular, a man named Tommy Swint, seemed especially drawn to her. Friends would later call it obsession. And here's where the picture of Nikki's life gets more layered. A fiancé in her hometown, an ex who still shared part of her daily life, and a coworker whose attention was unsettling. 3 men, all connected to Nikki, each with a different place in her world. And in the weeks before her wedding, each of them would come under police scrutiny for very different reasons. In the moment though, Nikki wasn't thinking about danger. She was thinking about her future, the vows she would speak, the photos she'd frame, the life she was about to start. Richmond, Indiana. Didn't know it yet, but the story of Nikki Macauan's wedding wasn't going to end in celebration. It was about to become one of the most haunting mysteries the town had ever seen. Because before Nikki could walk down the aisle, she would walk into a laundromat. And that's where this story takes a turn. It's Sunday, late August, 3 weeks before the wedding. Nikki Macauan wakes up in Richmond, Indiana, with a to-do list. Her morning starts like so many others. Errands, laundry, maybe a little shopping before the day is over. Her sister lives just down the street from the local laundromat. Nikki's been using that spot for years. It's routine. Safe. Familiar. By early afternoon, Nikki is moving between the laundromat and her sister's home, checking the machines, folding clothes, and chatting about the big day that's now only 21 days away. Her dress is ready, the guest list is set, and the countdown is on. But at some point that afternoon, something changes. Nikki tells her family she's being harassed by a couple of men at the laundromat. We don't know exactly what was said, maybe unwanted flirting, maybe something more aggressive. What we do know is that she was upset enough to mention it more than once. Her mother tries to reassure her, tells her to just bring the laundry back and dry it at home. Nikki agrees. She'll go grab the clothes and return in a few minutes. Meanwhile, her fiancé, Bobby Webster, is across town. He's at the tuxedo shop with a friend, getting final measurements taken. They're running behind schedule. Bobby says when he gets home, he flips on the TV and loses track of time. Back at her sister's house, Nikki never comes back. At first, no one panics. Maybe she ran into a friend. Maybe she made another stop. But as the minutes tick into hours, those easy explanations start to feel thin. By 5:30, Nikki is a no-show. She's not answering her phone. And then comes the detail that changes everything. She doesn't pick up her 9-year-old daughter. Her grandmother calls Bobby, asking him to come get Peyton. That's when alarm turns into something closer to fear. Bobby heads over. Nikki's siblings gather at their parents' home. They start calling hospitals, friends, even old contacts. Anyone who might have seen her. Nothing. No sightings. No calls back. Then comes the discovery that locks in their worry. Nikki's purse and ID are still at the apartment she shares with Bobby and her daughter. It's not just that she didn't come home, it's that she left behind everything she'd need if she'd left voluntarily. By now, the sun is going down over Richmond, street lights flicker on, and a family that was planning a wedding just that morning is now plotting a search. At 9 p.m., they file a missing person report with Richmond police. The official response is cautious. Nikki is an adult. The rules say she's allowed to go missing if she chooses, but the people who know her, they don't buy it for a second. She loved her job. She loved her daughter. There is no way she just walked away. By the time the sun set, they knew something was wrong. And within hours, investigators would start looking at Nikki's world and the men inside it. And in the first frantic days after Nikki Macauan vanished, her fiancé Bobby Webster was front and center. He joined search parties. He stood in front of TV, cameras. He spoke to local reporters, calling for anyone with information to come forward. On the surface, he looked like a man desperate to find his bride-to-be. But to Nikki's family, something about Bobby's actions didn't sit right. It started with the phone calls. Not to police, but to the wedding.
He did. He started having behavior that was somewhat suspicious. He had canceled the wedding hall, got a refund for that. He had tried to return the ring to get a refund for that, had looked into her schooling, money for school to get a refund.
That's very eyebrow raising. I mean, Nikki's only gone a few days and this dude's already canceling the wedding? It's as though he knew she wasn't coming back.
And her wedding is already unraveling. We were out there in sweatpants, hair pulled back, wearing the same clothes for days. We weren't thinking about appearances. We just wanted to find her. Bobby? He was always clean-shaven, in pressed clothes, ready for the camera. That's not what you expect from someone who's supposed to be falling apart, and that detail stuck with them. While the rest of the family combed fields and wooded areas, muddy shoes, tired eyes, Bobby seemed untouched, his appearance immaculate. Some took it as composure, others as detachment. And when the TV crews arrived, he was often the one speaking on behalf of the search. And detectives had taken note too. They invited Bobby in for a polygraph, a chance to prove his sincerity, to silence the growing whispers. He agreed. But when the results came back, the examiner's conclusion was clear: deception indicated. Bobby had failed. And to investigators, it was a red flag. To Nikki's family, it felt like a smoking gun. But in law enforcement, a failed polygraph isn't a conviction. Courts don't accept it as proof. And without hard evidence, without a witness, a crime scene, or forensic ties, police couldn't make a move. They reviewed his alibi. Bobby said he was at the tuxedo shop with a friend that checked out. He said he came home, watched TV, and lost track of time. There was no evidence to disprove it. They looked for inconsistencies, for slip-ups in his timeline. There were questions, but nothing that could be proven false beyond doubt. And so, despite the failed polygraph, despite the cancellations and refund requests, despite the family's growing mistrust, Bobby Webster remained a person of interest, not a suspect. He was free to walk the same streets, free to speak to the media, free to live as the search for Nikki stretched on. And then for Nikki's family, it was a gut punch. They wanted someone held accountable. They wanted a break in the case. Instead, they watched the investigation pivot towards someone else entirely. Because, if it wasn't the groom, who else in Nikki's life could have wanted her gone? By late November, almost 3 months after Nikki Macauan vanished, hope is wearing thin in Richmond, Indiana. The search teams have grown smaller, the phone tips less frequent, the leads fewer and fewer. And then, something. Not the miracle Nikki's family had been praying for, but a lead they couldn't ignore. 40 miles away, across the state line in Dayton, Ohio, sits a quiet residential complex. To anyone passing by, there's nothing unusual about the row of cars lined up outside. But to the officers scanning plates that day, one of those vehicles stops them cold. It's Nikki's car, the same vehicle she drove on the day she vanished, sitting in plain sight, unlocked, right in the parking lot of an apartment complex where her ex-boyfriend lives, Stephen Johnston, the father of her daughter, the man she once loved, and later left after a relationship.
I blame myself for it. Because if I had treated her mother better, her mother would still be here.
Days of the investigation. But now, this find brings his name roaring back into the spotlight. When investigators open the door, they see something that stops them in their tracks. Inside the car is the laundry Nikki was folding the day she disappeared. Not dumped, not scattered, but folded neatly, stacked in baskets, like someone had just finished the chore. That single detail changes the entire picture. If she'd been taken by force from the laundromat, how could the laundry be folded? Did she leave willingly? Did she drive here herself to meet someone? Or did her abductor know enough to keep that detail in place, to make it look like nothing was wrong? The distance also raises questions. Who drove the car here, and why this complex, of all places? Because to investigators, this wasn't just any address. This was Stephen Johnston's address. Police waste no time. Stephen is brought in for questioning again. He sits down for another round of interviews.
Whatever they needed, I would have gave it to them the very next day. All they had to do was ask.
And what happened?
We talked to him. He did a polygraph, and he passed the polygraph.
He passed the polygraph. So just coincidental that he lived in the apartment complex where the vehicle was found?
I believe so.
You're probably thinking like, man, this is a big break we wanted. The evidence is pointing towards this individual. He has a connection. They have a child together. He's an ex. Maybe their relationship took a wrong turn somewhere, and then nothing.
Huge disappointment.
Her workplace, a correctional facility in nearby Dayton, and there was a name they'd heard before, a man whose attention toward Nikki had already been described in one word: obsessive.
Did it turn out to be the big break in the case?
No. The vehicle was processed for DNA, for blood, for fingerprints, but we didn't find anything.
I blame myself for it. Because if I had treated her...
With suspicion cooling on both Bobby Webster and Stephen Johnston, investigators start looking outward. Who else had regular access to Nikki? Who else had reason to be in her life, and maybe reason to want her out of it? Their search takes them to Dayton, Ohio, to the correctional facility where Nikki worked. In a place like this, you get to know people, colleagues, supervisors, and sometimes those connections cross boundaries. For Nikki, one name stands out among the rest. And it's a name police had already heard in whispers. Tommy Swint. At first glance, Tommy was just another coworker, but behind the scenes, friends and family say, his interest in Nikki was different, persistent, unwanted, and to some, unsettling. In the weeks before Nikki's disappearance, that interest became impossible to ignore. During her bridal shower, a private celebration meant for friends and family, a gift arrived, lingerie, not from her fiancé, not from her ex, from Tommy Swint. He didn't attend the shower, he just sent it, wrapped, delivered, intimate, and out of place. Those who knew Nikki said it wasn't just inappropriate, it was creepy, and when investigators learned about it, they started asking questions about what else Tommy might have done. They called him in. At first, Tommy sat down with them, but his cooperation didn't last long. He avoided direct answers, drifted off topic, and when the questions got close to Nikki's disappearance, his responses were guarded, clipped, calculated. And Tommy had a history, a reputation. People who knew him, especially women, described him as controlling, aggressive, and at times, violent. Police records hinted at confrontations. Friends of friends warned that he had a temper that could turn on a dime. For detectives, it was enough to keep him on their radar, but not enough to arrest him. There was no hard evidence linking him to Nikki's disappearance, no eyewitnesses, no forensic ties, no confession, so they watched him, quietly, waiting for a mistake, waiting for something, anything, that could break the case. But that moment never came. And as the months passed, leads dried up. The tips slowed. The case files grew thicker, but not deeper. And then, silence. The investigation into Nikki Macauan's disappearance would remain open. But with no new evidence, it began to fade from the headlines. And for 6 long years, the case went cold. But Tommy Swint's story wasn't over. In fact, it was about to take a turn no one saw coming. 6 years. That's how long Nikki Macauan's case had been cold. 6 years of unanswered questions, of leads that went nowhere, of a family still living in limbo. The name Tommy Swint still lingered in the files. But without evidence, he was just another name on a list of persons of interest. And then, a stunning twist. Investigators learned that Tommy Swint, the man they had quietly suspected for years, was now wearing a badge. He had become a police officer in Trotwood, Ohio. What's more, he never told his department that he was a person of interest in an active missing person case. Not in the application, not in the interviews, not even once during his training. When Richmond police contacted Trotwood's chief to make sure they knew exactly who they had on the force, the reaction was immediate. Tommy was called in. He was given a choice: resign quietly or face termination. Tommy chose to resign. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it exploded. Tommy sued. A wrongful termination lawsuit. He claimed he had never been told he was a person of interest in Nikki Macauan's disappearance. Richmond police countered, saying that wasn't true, and as the court filings piled up, so did the headlines. Tommy's face was now everywhere, not just in Richmond, but in the greater Dayton area too. That publicity was about to change everything, because in Dayton, Ohio, someone was watching the coverage. Someone who recognized his face from a case that was far older than Nikki's. The year was 1991. The victim, 33-year-old Tina Ivory. She had been found on the outskirts of Dayton, strangled, beaten, and dumped in a trash pile along the side of a road. For more than a decade, her murder was unsolved. DNA had been recovered, blood and semen, but there was no suspect to match it to. Until now, an anonymous tip landed on a detective's desk. Look at Tommy Swint for Tina Ivory's case. The source? Unknown. The motive? Unclear. But to investigators, it was the kind of break they had been waiting for, and it didn't come from Nikki's case. The anonymous tip about Tommy Swint wasn't just a hunch. Dayton detectives went straight to the Tina Ivory case file, the one that had sat cold since 1991. Inside were preserved crime scene samples, blood stains, semen traces, and other biological evidence carefully sealed for decades. The DNA profile had been ready for years, waiting for a match. They didn't have to wait long. Richmond police, still holding on to their own suspicions about Tommy and Nikki Macauan's disappearance, had already collected his DNA during earlier cooperation. That sample, meant for one investigation, was now compared to the DNA from Tina Ivory's murder scene. The result was a perfect match. The bloodstains, his. The semen, his. The odds of it belonging to anyone else were near zero, and that wasn't all. Forensic specialists re-examined old evidence, the tape that had been used to bind Tina's body. Modern technology pulled a fingerprint from its surface. When they compared it to Tommy Swint's, it matched. Point for point. It was enough to connect him to one brutal murder, and detectives believed it could also be the key to unlocking Nikki's case. But they couldn't just knock on his door and slap on handcuffs. They wanted to control the moment. So they came up with a plan. Lure him in under the guise of a routine request. In Alabama, where Tommy had moved and was working as a security guard, local officers staged a traffic stop while he was driving to work. The pretext? They needed his fingerprints to update records. Tommy was cooperative, calm. He walked into the station in uniform, still in control. Or so he thought. Inside, they quietly collected his prints. The same prints that would later seal the case against him in Tina Ivory's murder. With the DNA and fingerprint matches in hand, prosecutors moved quickly. An arrest warrant was drawn up. Officers were briefed. They had him. After nearly 2 decades of suspicion, they were finally ready to take down Tommy Swint. But when they went to serve that warrant, something happened that no one saw coming. The arrest warrant for Tommy Swint was ready. The charges, murder in the death of 33-year-old Tina Ivory, were airtight. DNA matched, fingerprints matched, The case that had been cold for nearly 20 years was about to have its day in court. But for Richmond police, this wasn't just about Tina. This was about Nikki Macauan. They believed that if they could bring Tommy in, sit him down under the weight of a murder charge, he might finally talk. He might finally tell them what happened to Nikki. On a quiet street in rural Alabama, law enforcement moved in. Richmond detectives coordinated with local deputies. The plan was simple: approach his home, take him into custody without incident, and begin the long process of getting him back to Ohio. Officers positioned themselves. They approached cautiously, knocking at the door. Inside, silence. Then, movement. And before they could take him into custody, one sound cut through the air. A single gunshot. Inside, officers found Tommy Swint. He had taken his own life. No standoff, no goodbye, no answers. And just like that, the only man police believed could tell them what happened to Nikki Macauan was gone. For Nikki's family, the news was a gut punch with two edges. On one side, relief that a suspected killer would never hurt anyone else again. On the other, the crushing reality that justice for Nikki might have died with him. I was glad for Tina Ivory's family, but for us, it was like losing Nikki all over again. We thought, maybe, just maybe, we'd get to hear the truth. Now we'll never know. In Richmond, the investigation remained open. The file still sat on the desk, leads still trickled in. But without Tommy, the case that began in a laundromat in 2001 was once again frozen in place. The one man who could have told them where Nikki was, why she never made it home, what really happened that Sunday afternoon, had taken those answers with him to the grave. With Tommy Swint gone, many believed the trail had gone cold forever. But behind the scenes, Richmond investigators say there is still one more name in their notes. A woman, a former co-worker of Tommy's at the correctional facility. A woman who police believe wasn't just a colleague, but a love interest. Someone close enough to hear his secrets. Someone who might know exactly what happened to Nikki Macauan. Detectives suspect that in quiet moments, during late-night conversations, Tommy may have told her the truth. And if he did, then she holds the final piece of this puzzle. The last link to Nikki's fate. Nikki's family has a message for her. Get right with God. Get right with us. If you know something, it's time to speak. 17 years later, Nikki's daughter is grown. She has a child of her own, and she still wonders what happened to her mother. Her family still waits for the day when they can stop asking questions and start grieving with answers. And the man who may have taken her secrets to the grave might not have been the only one who knew. This case still has unanswered questions, and someone out there may hold the final piece. If you want more stories where the truth fights back, subscribe now, because the next case might be the one you help solve.